seems like from the Michigan law, what you just had up there, doesn't it seem that you're saying it's not unconstitutional on its face, but they're still leaving the door open for an as-applied challenge? If someone comes forward who can prove I'm definitely not under the influence?
It's possible. I don't know. I don't know what the lawyers in that state wanted to do with that case, if they wanted to challenge. I know there was an effort in the legislature to clarify the law so that an individual who didn't appear to be impaired wouldn't be prosecuted if the bill didn't go anywhere. I know I'm running short on time, so I'll take questions in a minute. I do want to run through real quick the difference between alcohol and marijuana on driving impairment and performance. Someone smokes pot. What happens when they want to drive a vehicle? Well, there's a number of tests. There's simulator tests, and there's actual on-road tests that give us a pretty clear idea what consistently seems to happen. They tend to drive more slowly. Yeah. They tend to not follow the vehicle in front of them as closely. And they tend to have a decrease in reaction time. They need a larger amount of time to respond to a certain situation. There are several studies that have shown this. SDLP, standard deviation of lateral positioning, that's basically a fancy way of saying that they weave. They don't keep the right tires close to the median as they did when they were sober. And they have some critical tracking abilities seem to be reduced. That's talking about their peripheral vision. They can look straight ahead very well, but if they need to pick up something from the side view, they don't pick that up as well as when they were sober. This is very interesting though. Drivers tend to be aware of their impairment and they try to compensate for it, typically by driving more cautiously, or this one paper I just want to quote a sentence from, by refusing to drive altogether. They gave these individuals in Europe Marinol, and they tried to put them on a closed track, and they reported that under significant cannabinoid influence, the participants refused to drive when they were asked. Very interesting response. This subtle impairment, while we see this on these simulator tests, we see it on these closed course tracks, this is very important. This subtle impairment does not appear to play a significant role in on-road traffic accidents, particularly when we compare to alcohol. Well, how do we know that? There's a couple major studies that have come out in the last couple of years where they take literally thousands and thousands of fatal accident crash data, they try to assess culpability, they determine that these people had used alcohol, drugs, marijuana, no drugs at all, and they try to see if there's a greater association between people using marijuana, having an accident, and if they had no drugs in their system, or if they had alcohol in their system. This is a very good study that came out of France a couple of years ago. They looked at almost 11,000 crash fatalities over a period of 2 years. What they found was drivers had any identifiable evidence of THC in their blood. They're almost twice as likely to have been responsible for a fatal accident than if they were completely sober and had nothing in their blood. If they had any amount of alcohol in their blood, however, they're almost 9 times more likely to be in a fatal accident. Drivers with the highest level of THC in their blood, this was above 5 nanograms, slightly over twice the risk compared to a sober driver. Compare that to drivers with the highest level of alcohol in their system in the study were 40 times more likely. Bottom line was drivers with even the lowest levels of alcohol presented a higher relative risk than drivers with the highest levels of THC present in their blood. And we're talking about these levels of alcohol, we're often talking about legal levels of alcohol. People with even high levels of THC do not seem to have nearly the accident risk or elevated risk of an accident than individuals who drive with legal amounts of alcohol in their system. Bedard looked at 10 years of crash data, 50,000 crashes. Once again, he found individuals with THC in their blood did have a slightly elevated risk of engaging in driving behavior that led to an accident, but when it was compared to individuals who had alcohol in their system, including legal amounts of alcohol, individuals with alcohol in their system had a much greater risk. The frequency of drinking and driving and the severe impact of alcohol on driving abilities are well beyond what has been shown with cannabis. Movig does a great study in the Netherlands. I say it's a great study because it's a prospective observational case control study. They used the Grand Rapids model. The Grand Rapids model was used to establish per se levels of alcohol in this country, whereas the other 2 studies begin with the crash and work backwards. Movig and colleagues take crash data from a specific intersection and they see if there is any association between individuals who had accidents at the intersection and their drug use. They then take random individuals who drive through the intersection safely and don't have accidents, and they pull them over. and they randomly look to see whether they're sober or have drugs and alcohol in their system. That's why it's called a prospective study. It's a much more accurate way of seeing drugs are really involved in elevating one's risk. They have found no association between exposure to cannabis and road accidents. Driving performance, real quick, a lot of you might already be aware of this, or repeat some of the information I gave before. Robé did some great work in the Netherlands, compared alcohol's effects versus marijuana's effects. Essentially what you see here is people under the influence of alcohol are more confident, they are more apt to speed. People under the influence of marijuana are aware of their impairment and tend to drive more cautiously. Once again, he found that THC's effects, even the highest, most acute effects on a vehicle, never exceeded blood alcohol levels of 0.08 and were no way unusual compared to many medicinal drugs. Ronan just did a study, just came out a couple months ago, also looked at marijuana compared to alcohol. Interestingly, found the number of collisions occurring, this is in a simulator, after lower levels of THC was not significantly different from the number of collisions occurring during the control sessions. I'm going to wrap this up in case people have any questions. One last thing I do want to point out, when talking about Robé and some of these other studies, I attend conferences that are put on to make state witnesses better witnesses in these cases. So I know how they think. At the last Society of Forensic Toxicologists conference I attended, there was a whole panel on what to do when the defense attorney brings in a witness to talk about the Robé study. They are now being taught how to respond when we bring up this sort of research. And they've got a really good response to the Robé study. And if you haven't heard it before and the first time you hear it's in court, chances are you're going to be in some trouble. Because they're going to tell you that those results that Robé found, mild impairment, all sound well and good. But you know what? They were smoking 2% THC. Kids on the street these days, they're smoking 20, 30% THC. So take the impairment Robé found, amplify it by 20 times, and that's the effect you see. What are you going to do when they say that? You can say, well, maybe the marijuana they're smoking isn't 20 times greater, but to try no way to prove that. The way I would respond to that is say in the Robé study, individuals had to smoke the entire marijuana cigarette, which tends not to happen when people are smoking socially. They also have to puff every 15 seconds. They got to smoke, puff, hold it in, 15 seconds later they got to repeat the drill, and they've got to do that for a whole marijuana cigarette. There again, the Robé, if they want to say the Robé study does not reflect the current way people use marijuana today, then we can say, in fact, yes, that might be true, but there are other ways the Robé study does not reflect the way people smoke marijuana that are also to our benefit, and you can counter some of those arguments. But it's very important to know what the other side is saying and what they're doing with the science we're bringing up. The last thing here is just some testimonials from some of the attorneys I've worked with. I'd be happy to work with all of you on this issue, and I thank you for being an engaged audience.